Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection. If you see my jaw poking out, sorry, I have a little ginger lozenge in there because I'm having a little issue with my throat this morning, so please just ignore it. So we're going to begin with our prayer of surrender leading into today's devotion. So here it is. Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. Take from me what you will. Awaken in me what you will. The Christ man is around me. The Christ mind is in me. The Christ power flows through me. And the Christ mystery exists as me. I believe it. I perceive it. And now I receive it. I am surrendered. Amen. All right. So March 4th, our title of the daily devotion is Happy for No Reason. And here's the affirmation. Today I know that happiness is my natural state, and I need no specific reason to feel happy other than I want to. All right, so it says, when people ask you what you want, answer them, I want to be happy. And when they ask, what makes you happy? Answer, being happy. And when they say, you're a nutcase, respond, maybe so, but I'm the happy one and you're not. This somewhat comical fictional exchange given by spiritual teacher Esther Hicks makes a good point. Most people feel they need a reason to be happy. In fact, our culture tends to think people who are happy too much of the time for no apparent reason are looking through rose-colored glasses, not living in reality, and may even be a bit crazy. That's because too many of us have allowed this world of duality and suffering to convince us that being miserable is not only unavoidable, but the norm, and that happiness is the exception. That's simply not true. Happiness is our natural state, and we need no other reason to be happy than that we want to be. The true reality is that your brain can't tell the difference between thinking you feel happy and actually feeling or being happy. When you're not happy, what is it you want most? To be happy. As we know, thoughts become things. So think happy thoughts about happy things, and it won't be long before happiness manifests in your reality. All right, our ending prayer. Spirit of happiness, help me keep myself in the vibration of happiness and well-being today by taking my thoughts into captivity and directing them toward positive, happy things. Amen. Excuse me. Okay. So our devotion leads nicely into the teaching today, which is a continuation of last week and is simply entitled Resilience Part 2. Our devotion was about being happy and not needing any reason other than just wanting to be. But it seems like these days people are finding more and more reasons to not be happy. I'm going to reread a few statements from the teaching last week, some quotes from our new friend that I found on Instagram that I'll let you know about, Dr. Raquel, the capacity expert, that's what she calls herself, that highlight this. She said, mental health care was supposed to help us grow, but instead we've weaponized it. Therapy language isn't being used for healing anymore. It's being used to control. And the worst part is that most people don't even realize that's what they're doing. If someone holds you accountable for your actions, you call them toxic. When a relationship doesn't work out, you walk away and call them a narcissist. If someone disagrees with you, you say they need therapy so they can heal. And just like that, we've turned therapy speak into a way to shut other people down instead of doing the real work of self-reflection. Not everyone who hurts you is a narcissist. Not every hard conversation is emotional abuse. Not every uncomfortable experience is trauma. Okay, so that was just a little review from last week, basically making the point that there are a lot of people who have decided, albeit many unconsciously or unknowingly, to find reasons to be unhappy with their lives because everything they perceive as being wrong is someone else's fault. And Dr. Raquel's proposed solution to this was for everyone to strive to become more resilient by not just learning all of these coping mechanisms to ease our pain in the moment, but by actually working on making our inner peace so strong and solid that we eventually don't need the coping mechanisms anymore. Okay, remember we made the connection with medicine? You're only supposed to be on the medicine until it helps you get better. But it's become the norm now for us to just start taking medicine and never stop because we're not addressing the root cause. She suggests we view these mental health tools as a ladder or a stepping stone to actually getting better rather than allowing them to become a crutch that we are always dependent upon or worse, addicted to. So here's a little of what she said. Relying too heavily on these tools means you're not actually growing, or I would add healing. You're just creating distance from anything that requires you to. Instead, what we should be teaching people is how to regulate their emotions without needing too much personal space to do it, how to communicate clearly instead of shutting people out, how to trust themselves to navigate challenges rather than avoid them. This is why I talk so much about emotional capacity, because mental health isn't just about managing stress. It's about making sure that you have the internal strength to handle the stress. Okay, we're going to talk more about that in a moment, but just let me finish what she's saying here. The reason peace feels so hard for people like this, and she's referring to people who are trying so hard to control their environment so that they won't ever have to deal with any sort of negativity whatsoever. The reason peace or attaining peace feels so hard for them is because they are obsessed with how to get it instead of with who they need to become in order to embody it. So how do we do that? How do we begin to embody things like peace and resilience, where we have the ability for the most part to remain calm and grounded in the face of chaos, uncertainty, and even tragedy? Well, first we need to understand a little bit more about the difference between what I'm going to call today good stress and bad stress, or good struggle and bad struggle. As with most things, it is a matter of your perspective. And sometimes it simply comes down to choosing to be happy, like we talked about in the devotion today, or allowing yourself to play the victim, blaming everyone else for how you're feeling at any given moment instead of working on this quality inside yourself of resilience. I did a teaching about 5 years ago on that called Putting Struggle in Its Place. And because as we'll see a little later on, a certain amount of and a certain kind of struggle can be good because it's the kind that results in personal growth, like Dr. Raquel was talking about last week. So struggle isn't always bad. It's not always, but it's also not always good. It just needs to be put in its appropriate place. And I want to read now a portion from that teaching that I did 5 years ago. I said it's important that we learn how to frame events, always choosing to walk in love rather than in fear, choosing to rule our thoughts rather than letting them rule us. Our teaching today, and this was 5 years ago, is going to be about choosing whether or not to struggle. You'll notice I didn't say choosing not to struggle, but rather whether or not to struggle. As this topic has been rolling around in my head, I have found that I've actually had a change of heart or a change of opinion about it. When I first started thinking about it, I was coming from only one angle, one perspective, and that was struggle, for lack of a better way to put it, is a bad choice. But I'm no longer looking at it from one perspective only. And I was going to make the comparison between living in struggle versus living in what is known as flow state, where things come into your life relatively easily. And obviously my opinion was going to be that flow state was superior to struggling for things and believing that you always have to work very hard. And quite honestly, that's what I lean toward personally. In my life, I prefer allowing things to come to me synchronistically rather than having to get out there and hustle for them. I'm a little bit lazy. But that's me, and I understand now that that is my preference. But someone else might have a different preference, and they are not wrong for that. And then I told a story giving a personal example of one day when my husband was installing or trying to install a vent in the hood above the stove in our kitchen, and he was really struggling with it. Every other word out of his mouth was a complaint, often accompanied by an expletive, because there were lots of things about this process that he had yet to figure out. So he mumbled and grumbled to himself to the point where I finally said something. I asked him if what he was doing was completely necessary. I said, after all, the stove has been just fine for the past 10 years. The way it is. And I remarked that if it involved that much struggle and was that much of a hassle, as his complaining was indicating, why was he continuing to do it? So he didn't really answer. He just kind of harumphed and laughed in that sarcastic way that said, oh, you don't understand anything. And he was right, because I do not understand his need for struggle sometimes. He and I are very different. Having said that, I must also say that I do understand some people actually enjoy struggling because for them there is a payoff. Now, that can be a bad thing, but not necessarily. For instance, after I made that comment to him, I noticed that a few minutes later his self-talk, which was actually out loud, started to change because he began to figure things out. So his struggle stopped being fruitless, just complaining, and it began to be a victory of sorts because it had led him to some answers. And the joy of figuring some things out through his struggle was his payoff. So, you see, I get my payoff and my joy from not having to struggle. I would rather the solution come to me without the struggle, but he gets his joy and payoff by struggling through the stress until he finds a solution. So his way is not right and my way is not right. We are both right when we do what is right for us. So the question is, can I let him be right and follow his path of struggle that leads to victory and not make him wrong, while I at the same time enjoy my path of non-struggle, which is what is right for me? So everyone's right is different. His right is victory through struggle, and mine, and also he loves that whole perseverance through adversity thing. My right is non-resistance, flow state, allowing and receiving. So I want to interject here that there's a difference between being in flow state, as I was just talking about here, and where I was choosing to allow things to come to me rather than forcing things through struggling and living in avoidance of anything negative. Okay, so those are two different things. Not wanting, living in flow state is not the same thing as I was talking about last week, where you just try to wrap yourself in bubble wrap and never, ever, ever have to come up against anything that challenges you in any way. That's not the same thing. So, and Dr. Raquel, the information I gave you last week from her was talking about the same thing. Being in that flow state of receiving is not the same as building walls of protection around yourself in order to avoid pain and discomfort of any kind. One is coming from the confidence of knowing you deserve good things and believing the universe will answer you positively when you ask for those things. And the other is coming from the fear of ever having to experience any degree of discomfort whatsoever. So do you see the difference in those two places that's coming from? I ended that teaching with this statement: struggle is neither good nor bad. We each get to make the choice to participate in struggle or not, depending on what result we want and what kind of lifestyle we prefer. Struggle is fine if we learn to put it in its place and not let it become a fruitless pursuit. If struggle eventually bears fruit in our life, then it's worth it. What we don't need to do is make those who don't make the same choice concerning struggle that we do wrong for it. Okay, so that was my teaching about learning how to put struggle in its place. And as I said, their struggle can be a good thing if it produces fruit or if it causes you to grow, as Dr. Raquel pointed out last week. Sometimes that's the only way we can grow is through struggle. And sometimes we only need it for a designated period of time. Like most things in life, it's kind of an ebb and flow. So I want to go back to those tools we were talking about last week, like walking away from something that drains you or setting boundaries with other people. These tools can indeed be helpful temporarily until we have embodied inner peace to the degree that we're not always needing them to calm ourselves down and we're not constantly protecting our peace. I'm going to read something now that explains what I'm talking about a little more from a woman named Molly McCord. She says, when too much defensiveness has built up, you construct walls of self-protection that don't truly serve you, that are connected to previous environments or experiences that perhaps were valid when you were younger, but are no longer necessary and are therefore just obstacles now to your healing and growth. Maybe your 8-year-old self or your 13-year-old self or even your 21-year-old self needed that wall of self-defense when something energetically overwhelming was going on. Sometimes big emotions need walls in order to contain them. This can certainly be the case if your childhood was spent around anyone who was emotionally unpredictable and erratic, especially if they ever attacked you emotionally or physically. This type of childhood requires the construction of defensive walls or the creation of defense mechanisms. At that point, these things were foundational needs. But once growth and healing begins to take place, you need to reflect on what is no longer needed as you evolve. Sometimes this process is uncomfortable and something you'd just rather not deal with, but the universe will always send you what you need in order for your soul to grow. The natural process of personal evolution, should you choose to accept it, will show you better ways to handle things, and any work you do in that direction will surely pay off in time. All right, so we hear her saying here that what we talked about last week, these coping mechanisms, these emotional relief tools are not wrong and they're not bad, but they're meant to be temporary. As you mature emotionally and spiritually, and as you work on the strength of your inner peace and resilience, you will use them less and less because you will need them less and less. So that's one aspect of understanding the purpose of struggle and stress, knowing that in some instances it's good because it's helping you grow, but it must be kept in perspective or in its place. And you must also realize that certain types of self-protection strategies that you use to deal with stress and struggle should be temporary. There will come a time when you need to start healing, growing, and evolving beyond them. Okay, I'm going to pivot now and talk for a bit about good stress, the kind that causes you to grow. And this information is from a talk given by Dr. Aditi Nurakar. Okay, she is a stress expert, and she calls this talk How to Beat Toxic Stress. She says, stress is a force that is all around us like gravity. It's part of our lives, and it is inescapable. The goal of life is not to live a life of zero stress. In fact, it is biologically impossible to do this. The goal is to live a life with healthy, manageable stress so it can serve you rather than harm you. Okay, time out here. Remember what we talked about last week when, what was the first question that we talked about asking ourselves? Is this, whatever it is, this thought, this action, this behavior, is this helping me or is this harming me? Pretty simple. She says that some amount of stress in life is unavoidable, but we can do things that ensure whatever stress we happen to encounter is helping and serving us, not harming us. So she then starts telling her personal story. She says, I was a medical resident in my second year of med school when I realized I was taking care of everyone else's heart, but not my own, while working in the cardiac unit of an ICU. I started having regular chest pains. After being checked out by my doctor and all the tests coming back normal, he told me it was just stress. I found this hard to believe. I didn't believe stress could affect me because I thought of myself as a very resilient person. I soon discovered, however, that I was living in something called the resilience myth. I was taught at a very early stage in my medical training that pressure makes diamonds. And so, as I was working 80-hour weeks, whenever a difficult moment occurred, I would say to myself, hey, I'm just a diamond in the making. But one day, my diamond cracked because the resilience myth I was living in said that resilient people don't get burned out. I had to learn that true resilience must take into consideration human limitations as well as look at life through the lens of self-compassion. I had to learn that not all stress is created equal. There are actually two different kinds. There is healthy, productive stress, which in scientific terms is called adaptive stress. Getting a new job, a promotion, or falling in love are examples of this. This kind of stress moves you forward in life. But when stress goes unchecked, is untamed, dysfunctional, and unproductive, that's something called maladaptive stress. These two types of stress impact your brain and your body totally differently. And again, we can just go back and simplify it down to, is it coming from love or is it coming from fear? Or is it going to result in love or is it going to result in fear? Under normal circumstances, our life is governed by our prefrontal cortex, which controls our memory, planning, organization, and forward strategic thinking. But during periods of maladaptive stress, our brain switches to being governed by the amygdala, which is focused only on survival and self-preservation. Okay, now time out. We've talked about the amygdala before. When your amygdala is running the show, that's when you're in constant flight or fight mode and you're always on high alert. That's those people that are always looking for somebody to offend them. You know, have you ever met those kind of people that, I know I've told you a story before. I need to be careful. I'm not sure who's watching, but I was with a certain person in my life and somebody approached us in public and we had a little interaction which I thought was completely innocent and harmless. And when they walked away, she made this comment and I thought, that's what you got from what they said? It just all, because this person was always looking to be offended, for it to always be about this one particular subject that she had an issue with. So, moving forward. When the amygdala is chronically in control, then your inner critic, okay, your inner voice that is always criticizing either yourself or other people, gets a megaphone, amplifying every negative experience and causing it to stick to your brain like Velcro. When you learn to reset your stress levels, you take the megaphone out of your inner critic's hand. Let me tell you what I mean by that. This is still her talking. As you move through each day, it's likely that the same amount of good and bad are happening. But as I said, your inner critic would have you believe that the bad is bigger or worse or more frequent because that's how your brain operates when the amygdala has taken over. There is data to show that adverse events in childhood are largely what shapes your stress response. But that is not static. These responses can be changed. We now know that our brains grow, change, and adapt to life circumstances through the process of neuroplasticity throughout the entire duration of our lives. Our brains are constantly regenerating cells and connecting new circuits. So even if you have had difficult childhood experiences, it is possible with time and practice to create a new neural pathway in order to better manage your stress. And here's how you do that, she says. Here are two things that will help you reset the way you view and process stress and struggle. The first is a breathing exercise. The reason your breath is such a great first step is because your breath, and this was news to me, I never thought about it this way. Your breath is the only physiological process in the body that is under both voluntary and involuntary control. So, meaning you have the ability to consciously control your breath. You can hold your breath. You can breathe faster if you want to. You can slow it down. But if you decide not to consciously control it, it's just going to keep right on going. Then it kicks into involuntary. So your breath is a natural and easy way to tap into the mind-body connection in order to help it serve you. This exercise only takes 3 seconds and has 3 steps. You just stop, breathe, and be. First, when you feel the stress rising, just stop. Take a pause. Next, take a deep breath and then let it out. You see how we always, you know what we forgot to do today? I forgot, I usually, after the devotion, I usually stop and I say, take a deep breath, let it out, and then we do our little affirmation about, I totally forgot that today. So, interesting, because this is what it would have so fit. Okay. So when you're feeling stress or burnout, wait a second, I skipped ahead. When you feel the stress rising, okay, so you stop, you pause, you take a breath, let it out. Next, just be by mentally, consciously, and intentionally grounding yourself in the present moment. When you're feeling stress or burnout, it often leads to anxiety, which is always a future-focused emotion. You are on the runaway train of what if thinking. What if this happens? What if I can't do this? What if I fail? Stop, breathe, and be is designed to pull you out of that and get you back into what actually is right now. The second reset technique follows this one, and it is simply gratitude. The reason gratitude is so helpful in resetting your stress is because it focuses on something called cognitive reframing. What you focus on grows. Studies show these practices, when used consistently for 60 to 90 days, have proven to significantly influence and impact your mood and strengthen your resilience. So that's what we've been talking about, how to strengthen your inner peace to the degree where you don't rely so much on all of these protection devices. Much of our stress is due to feeling powerless over events and circumstances in our external world that are beyond our control. Learning how to manage is a skill just like riding a bike. Once you learn it, it's always there. You just have to decide to do so. So really good information there on some ways to strengthen your resilience at its core. And the interesting thing is, the more you do it, like I said before, then you'll find the less you have to do it, because the responses of breathing, remaining present, and finding something to be grateful for, even in the midst of struggle, will then become automatic. You know, if you practice something for, 21 days, 30 days, it becomes a habit. If you do this long enough, your brain will just automatically function this way. When things start going south, as they say, I don't really like that phrase because I'm from the South. It's like, let's say, that's kind of denigrating to the South. When things start going sideways, let's say, you automatically start looking for the silver lining that is always there, even if it's just, I'm learning something from this situation. Even if it's figuring out what you don't want, like we've talked about before, okay? Haven't we done that? Sometimes it takes being in a not so good relationship to know what things you want to look for next time in a better relationship. Sometimes you have to be in a not so great situation for the motivation to tell yourself, okay, I'm not going to let myself get in this particular situation again because I don't like the way it feels. Sometimes you have to feel the negative before you understand or appreciate fully the better one. So before that helps you develop those red flags. You start to see those warning signs a little earlier every time you walk into a situation. I want to end today by reading a somewhat humorous story that makes a point about struggling, or the concept of if you just work harder, then everything will be okay. Sometimes working harder and pushing through is not the solution, okay? Sometimes it is, like we talked about, but sometimes it's not. Even though our particular culture seems to glorify struggle and say that it is. So I heard the story originally told by a man who goes by the name Sadhguru. Maybe that's a title, maybe that's his name. I'm not sure it's a title. So he's an Indian spiritual teacher, and here's what he said. Even when we work hard, why do our desires remain unfulfilled? Because just working hard doesn't accomplish things, and believing it does is the biggest problem. Right from your childhood, your parents taught you, if you study, how should you study? You should study hard. If you work, how should you work? You must work hard. They tell you to do everything hard, but just doing everything hard becomes a donkey's life. You become nothing more than a beast of burden. No one tells you you must study with joy. No one says to you, do your work with love. No, they only tell you must do it hard. They're making life very difficult for themselves with this thinking, and now they're ensuring that your life will be difficult as well. But if you're going to make yourself miserable in the process of working, what use is your work to yourself or anyone around you? Because if you're miserable, you're probably making everyone around you miserable too. Or we could add here for our purposes today, anxious. Okay, you're making everyone else around you. If you're anxious, it's contagious. You're kind of making everyone else contagious. Have you guys ever heard of that comedian? I'm sure you have, Cedric the Entertainer. Okay, so he has one of these little things in one of his comedy routines that cracks me up every time, where he says, if you just go into a crowd of people, he's actually discussing the difference between black people and white people. And he says, if a black person goes into a crowd of other and just starts running, they'll all start running without asking why. They just assume that something's wrong and they need to be running too. And so it's just kind of contagious. It's like if you're scared or if you're alarmed, like have you ever been in a situation where everything's fine and one person just kind of gets jumpy and then everybody's like, the energy just totally shifts. So, nothing happens simply as a result. I'm going back to him now. Nothing happens simply as a result of hard work. That is not the answer to everything that some think it is. Can I tell you a story? And here he goes into the story. One day, a man had an old car that had given out on him. It wouldn't start. So he went home and got his new kitten and a harness and came back to where the car was. He harnessed the kitten to the old car and began to say, "Let's go, let's go." The people standing around looked at him and asked, "Are you crazy? That little kitten can't pull that old car. What are you doing?" The man said, "Don't be fooled. Look, I have this horsewhip." So it's easy to see from that story how foolish it is to believe everything can be accomplished if you just work harder, or if you push others to work harder, even when it's obvious they are not capable of doing what you're asking, no matter how hard they work or how hard you push. You have to do more than just work hard. You must do the right thing for it to work. And I'm adding here, you must do the right thing for you. People who are successful not only because they work hard, but because they know the right thing to do for the particular job at hand. All right, so bottom line, it doesn't matter how hard he whips that kitten. That's a horrible mental image, but it's effective. The kitten will never be able to pull that car because it's not capable of it. Bad stress, okay, we're going to make an analogy here, a comparison. Bad stress, or what the good doctor we heard from earlier calls maladaptive stress, will never get you anywhere good because it's not capable of it. Adaptive stress, on the other hand, or struggle that causes real growth and expansion within you, will. And so the key is learning the difference between the two. And for that, we can go back to our question from last week. Is what I'm doing or thinking helping me or harming me? And now we can take it a step further and ask, is this behavior moving me forward in life? Is it something that is fruitful, even if it's a little or maybe even a lot uncomfortable right now in the moment? Or is it just continuing to make me spiral out of control like a spinning top and kind of knocking everybody around me off their center as well, not accomplishing anything? And you might ask, well, how can I know the difference? You can, because as we know, all the answers are already inside you. You just have to be willing to stop, breathe, and be long enough to notice. I like to think of it like giving birth to a baby. Is there pain and struggle involved? Yes, most definitely. Is the stress sometimes intense? Absolutely. But there is a knowing attached to it that at the end of the process, you're going to have a beautiful child. You're going to do something that moves your life and literally moves another life forward. That's an example of productive struggle. When you're in the midst of it, So take that to when you're in the midst of struggle, can you envision a beautiful outcome to whatever it is you're stressing or struggling over? Can you imagine something good and positive coming from the struggle? If so, good. Keep going through it. If not, drop it. And maybe we'll talk more about that, how to do that next week. Okay? Amen. All right. Let's stand together and sing our ending song. You going to go over there, Miss Diane? Miss Diane always helps me with our ending song that just tells us the truth that we are blessed always.
Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen. Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen.
Amen. Have a wonderful week. Be at peace. I love you.